these suns still look the same. There's something sinister. Tell me, is there somewhere I can place the blame? Is this all that we've got? Is this all that we've amounted to? I was down on my luck, baby, I just needed a little boost from you. All of heaven's saints, oh my darling, they've got nothing on you. Asleep at heaven's gates, you were tired of trying, and I know how that feels. But what a glorious sunrise. God, and how that warm and light feels upon my skin. What a glorious sunrise. Inside this cold case I'm in. Saints, oh my darling, they've got nothing on you. Asleep at heaven's gates, you were tired of trying, and I know how that feels, I do. But what a glorious sunrise. That warm and light feels upon my skin. What a glorious sunrise. God, I had a soul inside this cold case I'm in. What a glorious sunrise.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the 69th, insert meme, episode of Eunuch Corner Club Live. I apologize for the terrible lighting. The front light I was going to use just went out earlier, so I thought I had compensated with a different light, but it's not quite working. Regardless, here I am in my husband's old gaming room with all of his collectibles, hosting a wonderful stream tonight between two friends of mine, talking about a very important and hopefully very constructive topic for the evening. But just before we get going here, I would like to thank the people who support this stream. And let me pop this open quickly here. There it is. If you would like to support this stream and what I do, you can subscribe monthly on Subscribestar for even $1 a month like these fine people here do. And that definitely helps me with the encouragement to keep going and know that I have financial support to rely on month to month to keep going. You can also send paid chats via Odyssey because I am greenlit for hyper chats on Odyssey. You can send, the preferred method is using Entropy, which I prefer, of course. It has plenty of character limit, and you can say whatever you like over there. Even if you don't want to spend money, I always read out the questions, comments, and review the links sent to the question widget over on Entropy. And, of course, the community can vote those up and down for the ones that they think are the best. And you can send short messages with Cash App, PayPal, and Subscribestar tips. Now, normally, during the stream, hold on just a moment. Let me toggle back to me here. And there we go. Normally on the stream, I will pause to review community engagement as we go, but this is a different stream. This is going to be a long form discussion stream. All of the community engagement I will cover at the end when we wrap things up. So if you ask questions of my two guests tonight or ask questions of all three of us, they will be addressed at the end after our full discussion. So that'll be a couple of hours, maybe longer from now. With that being said, we're going to go ahead and introduce our guests, and we will get started. First up, we have my friend Red Hawk. Good evening, Red Hawk. Thank you for joining us tonight. How are you doing, my friend?
Oh, I'm doing well. Yeah, it's always a pleasure to be on.
Always a pleasure to have you. And for the first time, I think, on my channel is Praise of Folly. Good evening, Todd. How are you doing, my friend?
I'm doing great. How are you doing? Yes.
Oh, I'm happy to have the both of you here to continue this wonderful discussion. Now, you might ask yourself, what is this wonderful discussion? I'm going to embiggen my camera and we're going to talk about it. These two gentlemen here are the one on the left here, Praise of Folly, Todd down below. He's going to be speaking from a TradCon Christian angle. Red Hawk will be speaking from a Manosphere Red Pill angle about the issues that young men face and the choices or tactics that are to be implemented for the success of men. Now, I'm not going to put words in either of their mouths. They're going to be the ones speaking for most of this stream. I'm only here in a moderation capacity. This stream started about a month ago with Cigar Stream 158 over on Academic Agents channel, but a one Carl Benjamin came in unsurprisingly. He came from the top rope. He came in with a steel chair, and he just torpedoed the stream. And God love Carl's heart. I really wanted to hear this discussion between Red Hawk and Praise of Folly, and it didn't get to happen. So hopefully we're going to have perhaps even the first of many segments of this tonight to let these two discuss things from their vantage points about how to help young men and the issues that men face today. So before I put any more words in anyone's mouth or twist this a certain way, what we're going to do is we're going to start with Red Hawk, then we're going to move to Praise of Folly. We're going to let each man say why he's here, what he's going to represent, and after they're both done, we will open up the discussion in that way. So I'm going to remove myself from camera as to not be distracting, and we will start with Red Hawk. So Red Hawk, why don't you tell everybody why you're here and what you're going to be talking about in the platform that you're coming from?
Righto. So I guess the main reason why I wanted to address this topic in the very first place is throughout all of last year, I was having a lot of conversations with more, trad-leaning members of our community. I was on Dave, the distributist channel at one point. I had a conversation with Jay Burton. I had a conversation with Anglo Ortho, and all three of them, we had a conversation basically about, my argument essentially is that the trads, while their end state goals for the current state of intersexual dynamics between men and women, while their goals are indeed noble and something that I would agree with as an end state goal, I have severe disagreements with, number one, the situation where it stands today, number two, the past as, the trads envision it, and then number three, solutions to those problems. So basically, I'm just here to, point out my disagreements with what the trads have in their, step-by-step process to get us to the end point of which we all want. That's my position.
All right. Next up, we have Todd, Praise of Folly. Please do the same.
Right. So what sort of got me started on this was about 2 months ago. I don't even remember how it started, but Academic Agent and Red Hawk were engaging in one of the perennial TradCon RP community debates. And, this sort of cycle comes and goes. New people come in, new people leave. So, but it's a perennial dispute that's been around pretty much as long as this space has been around. And I thought, there's where my position would be is with the RP guys, I agree with their description of the state of affairs we live in. But I think that where I would agree with the TradCons is that their end state is a desirable goal, but it's not attainable for most men, or for that matter, most women in our society, especially traditionalists or right-wing leaning or whatever. And I was thinking, well, is there a way that we can sort of take those two and sort of thread the needle between them? There was somebody that tried to do that a long time ago. Well, not a long time ago. He canceled his blog like 2 years ago, Talrock. He was a friend of Rella Tomasi. And so, but since his departure, there hasn't really been an RP, I guess, Christian voice, though I don't know if I want to necessarily fill his shoes. But there is this sort of void or vacuum that I felt that could be filled, because we've already been around that circle. You know, it's still going to happen because people are going to be people, but I don't find that to be very constructive. So what I'd hoped to do was have talk to Sargon and talk to academic agent about this question, where okay, well, so we already concede the RP truths of the matter and don't have to then relitigate that, and then say, well, what can we do from there? So first of all, would be what are our long term goals, if they're the same or if they're not, and then regardless, what do we do knowing that? Because just sitting there on your bum doing nothing isn't going to help anybody get through this. So that's sort of what I hope to do. And you actually reached out to me, Yiz, on the follow-up video that I did with a friend of mine, Logos, about a week later, where we attempted to explain and explore more of this in greater detail. So I'm sure we'll have room to discuss that as well.
Yes, indeed. So we're going to launch this off by saying Red Hawk and Praise of Folly and I are all three friends. This is not going to be a petty debate. There's not going to be any chiseling. The disagreements we have are going to be handled intelligently, peacefully between friends. So the things that we all agree on are as follows. Men face a hellscape when it comes to dating. Men have the deck stacked against them in many ways, especially white men, but we'll leave the racial issues aside for tonight. The point of this discussion is to talk about the pathway forward and choices that young men can and should make for their well-being and for their success. This is where we have some disagreement. So I'm going to open this up to the two of you. I'm going to give you each the choice. Who would like to go first and criticize the other's platform? If neither of you will choose, I will choose one of you.
I'll let Red Hawk go first.
Red Hawk, are you cool with that?
Yeah, sure. All right. I'll go first here.
Right.
I think I'll just start at the very top of everything by saying that, to quote Bob Dylan, the times they are changing. And basically, the issue that we're having here is not so much let me say, our biggest problems aren't necessarily the people in modernity are like more degenerate than they ever have been before or anything like that. That's not necessarily where our problems come from. My argument is that our problems really come from the Industrial Revolution, feminism, the birth control pill, things like this that fundamentally changed the way that human, intersexual dynamics worked from basically the beginning of time, and they've flipped it completely on its head. And my argument is that all of us here, on the online right, whatever we want to call it, none of us are in a position to change any of those things. We can all talk about, like Uncle Ted all we want, and yes, he's got some good arguments, but none of us are getting rid of feminism. None of us are getting rid of birth control pills. And the problem is that what you have is a community of online right-leaning people who are almost exclusively men now talking about, okay, so how do we find ourselves and go and attract women? Well, there's not many women in this space. So where are you going to go? They're not here. So you have to attract them from outside places. And most of those women in the outside places are going to be some shade of leftism or apolitical or something like that. Most of them are going to be on birth control at some point in their lives. Most of them are going to be working a job, and all these kinds of things. So it's like, my biggest issue with so many of the trads is that they don't want solutions. They want a time machine. And I argue that, my faction of guys, the red pill, the manosphere, whatever you want to call it, we have plenty of resources for people to basically break yourself out of this, frame that you're forced yourself into by other people and go live inside your own frame. So if you want to be, the Christian guy to wait until marriage, that's fine. Go ahead and do that. My only, I don't deal in shoulds. My only should that I will ever say is just to be red pill aware. And that means understand female nature, because quite frankly, you're going to get completely screwed over in many ways, more than one, if you just do not understand the female nature, because the deck is so stacked against you. And one of my biggest objections with the trads is that they argue that it's a good idea for young men to go ahead and get married almost instantly these days. And we can put aside like the economic factors as to why that's a problem. But my biggest issue with it is that they have this expectation that women, they follow rules, ideologies, religion, codes of conduct, honor in the same way that men do. And they just simply do not. And that poses a really big problem for guys who get into the marriage game, don't understand the game that they're playing, and then essentially get screwed over because they've been told by, okay, well, the Bible says that women are supposed to obey their men. and then your wife doesn't start doing that, and then you're like, okay, well, now what I'm going to do? I'm stuck with my dick in my hand with nothing, with no resources to help me. My church isn't going to help me. My community of men isn't going to help me because those are all gone. The state isn't going to help me. So where can I get help? And that's why everyone is coming to the manosphere at this point, because it was a organization. Well, I wouldn't even call it an organization. It was a bunch of guys that loosely conglomerated together to solve all these collective problems that we're having, because there essentially was nowhere else to go. And so that's I'll let Todd respond here.
Thank you. Todd, please take 5 to 10 minutes and respond to that in turn.
Okay, so the consideration that I was trying to bring up on the stream with Red Hawk and Academic Agent was, so we can talk about solutions in one of two ways, right? One is on an individual level, every man for himself, which has sort of been the MO for a lot of the manosphere already. So, for example, he's not really active much anymore, at least on YouTube. Turfling Monkey would say, I'm here just to save men, not save the world, so on and so on. And okay, that's fine. But the issue then is only so many men can, quote, hack it in our current system, because let's look at the way a lot of the red pill couches success, the sort of financial career success, which takes a sort of financial savvy entrepreneurship, which if we look at a spreadsheet of talents and skills that men have, only really some men have that. Other men who have valuable skills but don't have good market skills, don't have a real good way to interact. There's like a wall, a barrier in their way. And, if they just had help from other men to breach that barrier or help them overcome that would put them in a better position. But then the question is, okay, let's say that we have this model, and this model is mostly successful for saving individual men in this time. And let's also say that we can't change the whole country as a whole. Okay, so all those are accepted. But if we look at the arc of decay and degeneracy that's coming, and almost everybody in this circle believes that some sort of collapse is coming. We all have maybe somewhat different arguments for why. Some of it's, for myself, it's technological decline. Other people think it's because, women are overrepresented in society. Other people think it's because minorities are overrepresented in society. But regardless of the cause, it's coming. And ultimately, no one man can do that, right? As John Donne said, no man is an island. Aristotle said that only gods or animals live alone. Man needs to live in community. So what I'd like to see, and part of the way I'd like to have directed the conversation was, how can we move from, so we have a spectrum now of men that have made it, men that are in the process of making it, and men that are still lost. Now, there's a sort of like pay it forward attitude that I'd like to see. And this is not just a critique of the RP community. I see this with the tradcons as well. I've made it, so, just bootstrap it like I did. The problem with that is, well, one, maybe you had the market skills that the other guy doesn't have. But also we see that as the society degenerates, becomes less high trust, more low trust rather. A lot of the paths that work for grandparents and parents don't work anymore. So totally new strategies need to be developed. And I don't really see these new strategies being developed. A good example would be, so Lee Kuan Yew, the then president of Singapore, was interviewed by Fareed Zakaria in the 90s. And he said that we in the East understand the importance of families because with the rise and fall of civilizations and empires, only families survived. From the Western perspective, you might also add religious institutions, but that's sort of outside of this discussion. And Fareed Zakaria didn't really quite get all that because, he's a urbanite American globalist. But the point is, though, Lee Kuan Yew is making a very important point. The family or kinship groups are lifeboats, life rafts for these disastrous scenarios. And even if you are a competent individual within the current system is degenerating and cannibalizing itself, which, as far as I know, I think we all agree on that. So at a certain point, there's going to have to be a decoupling from the system to something else. And as far as I can tell, that something else doesn't exist yet. And that's where we have, we need our trailblazers, our Daniel Boones, our Davy Crockett's, who have, quote, I guess, already made it in this current meta, and then are able to see what's coming and envision a future meta that we can then move to. And of course, they have the insight or the wealth or the skills to start creating it. But of course, you can't do it alone. Again, as we saw with Aristotle, man needs to live in a community, the polis. So then they can then create this life raft for other people to come to. Now, what I envision is, if we look throughout history, when a society becomes calcified, stratified, and inflexible, men, who are dissidents find ways to survive. So Christians went underground in the Roman Empire into the catacombs, because there was nowhere else to go really except underground. During the American frontier, well, even before that, the age of colonization, European dissidents just went west, across the Atlantic to the colonies, and then further west until they hit California. Once the West was closed in 1890, then you had what I would call legal loopholes. So you had like the beatniks and the hippies and all these groups that were in, because once the post-war era was done, and then you built the highways for cars and motorcycles. These were basically brand new. It was really difficult for the government to know how to regulate those things. So there's 20, 30 years of people just going ham with all this freedom until the government tapped it all down and regulated everything. And so the key insight here is imagining a new reality outside of the understanding of the current system. Because I think all of us understand that our current system has people in charge that ought not to be there and really don't know what they're doing, which means that they have an imagination deficit. And so by utilizing the imagination that we have, we can look at where they can't see, where they refuse to see, and then sort of build a community in that sort of mental legal vacuum. So, for example, right, they will pretend that minority crime statistics are not real, so it just doesn't exist for these people, right? Because it's just their mindset can't accept that. So we find all these things that their mindset can't accept, and then we imagine what a new society might look like, and then begin the process of constructing it. Because the way I see the problem is this: the system is collapsing, and we all seem to agree that for different reasons. So eventually we're going to have to decouple, but there's nothing to decouple to yet. Either A, necessity will force that, and that'll be very difficult and painful, or through foresight, those of us that have the insight, the resources, the will, can begin the process of building an ark, a lifeboat, whatever you want to call it, to then create a place for people to start reimagining and rebuilding outside of the system. And furthermore, even if the collapse is 50 to 100 years out, even living within it becomes impossible, right? Living in these highly crime-ridden urban areas is leading to a lot of flight of, capital flight, but also highly talented, skilled citizen flight, so like from California to Texas. That seems to have been reversed with the Roe decision. But the point is, though, even within the system, life is becoming increasingly impossible. And so what I was trying, hopefully able to do with this discussion, by threading the needle between the TradCons and the RP, is take the insights of the RP about the way the world is with the sort of ideals of the TradCons and figure out, can we build this sort of like lifeboat or ark for ourselves that can exist in some sort of, for lack of a better word, crack or pocket within the empire that it just overlooks us. And there just sort of inhabit it until either the empire collapses or something else happens.
Okay, thank you. Red Hawk, I would like you to respond to that and say if you agree or disagree with those points and why.
So this is kind of like the same issue we had on the first stream, is that while I agree with the points about, our civilization declining, the collapse looking more and more likely as the days go by, it just, I don't want to say it's above my pay grade, but it just kind of is, in the sense of what I'm trying to do with my own stuff. I feel like a lot of this is, even though it's really important, I feel like there's just so much there to break down that it's like putting the cart before the horse, kind of. Like, there's so many questions there. I don't really even know where to begin. It's like, is the regime actually going to allow people to, have parallel communities to themselves, where they can have, whatever kind of rules and regulations or laws or what society they want to have? That remains to be seen. How quickly is the collapse going to come? What form is it going to take? That also remains to be seen. So a lot of this kind of stuff, even though I think Todd is onto something here, I just don't really see it as being very productive for most people that are listening to this stream. I think it's far more productive for you to get your own house in order. I mean, as much gripe as we give Jordan Peterson, and rightfully so, he was definitely right about cleaning your own room and stuff like that. And that's definitely where I want to push more people that I reach out to and I talk to in my work, is just to get your own house in order, get your own relationships on point, live the kind of life that you want to live. And hopefully as you're working on that, more communities, kind of like the stuff we're doing with the Shieldings community and the events like that, will be forming on the side. And you can, lend your skills and your talents to things like that. I don't know. I guess I just kind of want this discussion to be kind of more narrow as opposed to more broad. Is what I'm getting at. My bread and butter is basically like, okay, I have disagreements with trad solutions to male and female dynamics with certain things, and then again, like Todd's points are right, but it's just not really. It's just not super important as to what I think is important right now for everybody that's listening. That's just my basic point.
All right. Then to move this conversation along, then we need to come to a point we need to discover the point where there is a divergence. Praise of Folly, Todd put forward ideas that are sympathetic to me and probably most of my viewers, of the build it and they will come approach, which is, of course, goes along with what the red pill approach is get your own house in order, be the best man that you can, build your own frame, etc. But I also agree with Todd that we are not loners, that no matter how successful an individual is, unless you have what the red pill community would call your betas, your workhorses, your regular men, in some kind of alignment and in some kind of community working to empower other men and have a shared ethos and a shared ethnos, then we don't really stand much of a chance, or a much worse of a chance, if push comes to shove and something very bad does happen, societally speaking. So when it comes to the solutions for building things that will last, building things that will empower men around you, I would like to hear first from Red Hawk what your approach and what your advice would be. Then I would like to hear what Todd has to say, and surely we will have some differences there that we can hopefully argue about constructively. So Red Hawk, I'd like you to go first. When it comes to the question to you then is, how would you recommend that men take the steps necessary to be the men that can, if not lead a community, be a part of a community that's bigger than just themselves and looking out for number one?
All right. I think that the best place for guys of whatever strife, of whatever religion that you might follow, or your creed, or your views on things, your best place to start is just to there's kind of like three pillars, I guess, is what I would call it. Is essentially like, okay, so why are you screwed up? Why do you have problems with women? Why do you have problems with your job? Why do you have problems with your communities and your friendships and things like this? It stems from a multitude of factors, largely resulting from things like men being raised as defective women, things like feminism, things like affirmative action, all these kinds of things. Now, the first thing is to basically, you need to get yourself out of other people's frames. And what I mean by this is that it's not productive for you to be sitting around and crying and whining and complaining about, this situation is really bad. The women, of today aren't like they were, 50, 60 years ago. The job prospects aren't as good as they were. And yes, all these things are true. But unfortunately, you're a guy. And no one's going to take care of you. Most of us got the short end of the stick here in life, but unfortunately, whether you like it or not, your responsibility as a man is to sharpen that stick and plunge it into the heart of anyone that's standing in your way. And this is just the male experience, and it has been from the beginning of time, and it's never going to change. So you just have to accept the fact that there was 40% attrition rate for men throughout all of history. 40% of men got to breed. That was it. The rest of them were losers, and again, that's never going to change. So what you got to do is get yourself out of living in other people's frame. Don't start thinking about, what other things are going on. Think about how you can actually, better your position in your own way. It's like, okay, well, first place to start would be to get into a gym and acquire a skill of some kind, whatever it is, and then become proficient at that skill to make yourself some money. And so you're getting yourself out of somebody's frame. Step 2 would be establishing, your own frame. And that comes with, building up confidence, which comes from competence, which comes from being proficient at things, so you're getting fit, you're making some money, you're talking to women, you're making friends, you are establishing your own frame that people can then choose to, become a part of. And that's would be step 3, getting other people to fall into your frame. Ideally, what you're looking for there is a girlfriend or a wife to fall into your frame. You're looking for, employees if you want to start a business, something like that, friends and, compatriots and business partners and things like that in like a community like ours. So basically, that's what I would, line up for guys. Those 3 steps. Get out of other people's frame, establish your own frame, and then pull people into your frame.
Okay, praise of folly. Todd, the same question comes to you.
Okay, well, first of all, I would agree with Red Hawk that you do need to have your own frame. You can't be emotionally dependent on other people because in experience, other people will use that against you as a control grid. But I do think, though, we do need to realize that we are materially dependent on each other. And this is, I think, a very helpful quote to highlight the problem that I'm trying to illustrate here. This is from Ebal for Bax's The Fraud of Feminism, chapter 5. And he's referring to the state, but this could also be circumstance and fortune. He says, in the grips of the forces of the state, I, even the strongest man, were he a very Hercules, is in as precisely as defenseless and helpless position relative to those in whose power he finds himself as the weakest woman would be in the like case, neither more nor less. So what's important about this is that, okay, this is Hercules, right? This is what Bax is setting up. Even if you were that, Chad tier, you'd be helpless against the state, which is apparently we all in this community believe is at some point going to come for us. Or even worse, you could argue the circumstances of collapse or whatever else comes our way. So then that brings the question, okay, yeah, we need together guys to start pioneering this solution. But let me give you an example. Let's say we have 2 groups of men. One group, which is highly individualistic and highly, overachieving, and they have, go it alone, bootstrap it. And they're like, well, look, I'll give you some advice at a distance, but I'm not going to hold your hand through this or help you out directly. And then we envision another group, which has a similar amount of high functioning men, but do what used to be called mentorship. Now, I'm not saying you just do this to anybody. I mean, you have to use prudence and caution to vet people. But there are there are 2 types of men that are in this sort of failed position. Those who arguably failed and no amount of effort on your part could ever bring them out of the funk they're in. But there's another group that is in a funk that if somebody paid it forward, they could get pulled out. Now, if we look at these 2 groups, 1 and 2, I think 2 has a better survival chance because by pulling out men who are, like you said, he is the betas, they can't do this all on their own, but they're very helpful once they've, to quote the Marines, unfuck themselves. And you try to find them and bring them in. That's going to lead to a more robust survival strategy than just saying, well, you know what, if you can't hack it, that's too bad. I just don't think that's a very helpful way to look at the problem. And furthermore, let's start with something small, right? Because I remember from the academic agent stream, the idea was like, well, what's our scale here? Well, obviously the national scale is too big. Obviously the state scale is too big. We could start with the individual for sure. But the next level up, I would call the fraternity or the manor bund, right? So once upon a time, I suppose it still exists if you're a Mason, you could literally hitchhike across the entire country for free by just hitting up the lodges. And it's like if you were, from Newark and you wanted to go to San Francisco, you could just, find lodge members and they pay it forward all the way through. Now, obviously, that's a high trust community. You have to be able to demonstrate that you've, been inducted into the Masons, that you know all the ins and outs. Because again, we do have the free rider problem. But what I'm saying is the next step, once we have a sufficient critical mass of high performing men, we need something like that.
Okay. Thank you both for that. And what we need to do now is find where we disagree and how we can come to an accord. Now, with what Red Hawk and Todd just laid out, they both agree that men need to clean their own room, so to speak, to borrow from the infamous Jordan Peterson. But beyond that, building a frame or building a community is critical. And I believe that we, from what we've heard, both agree on that. Now we're going to get to where we disagree, which is methodology, ideology, and religion. Praise of Folly, I would like you to go first this time, and I would like you to take the TradCon Christian religious approach to the morality, ethics, and how your ethos would guide you in creating not only a better self, but being a man that can network and create community. And then I would like to hear how Red Hawk's opinions on that differ and find some conflict between the two.
All right, sure. So when it comes to, this is where it's kind of easy, right? Because while Christians differ over theological perspectives, the nature of God, the sacraments, and all that stuff, the one thing that, if you let's say in 1913, when most of Europe and America were Christian, they tended to all agree on ethics. They might have differed how harshly to punish somebody, but regardless, the ethical agreements were more or less the same. And for Christianity, it's more or less this, right? No sex before marriage, no sex outside of marriage. You're with that spouse until the spouse dies, and then you can marry again. Now, again, there's some allowances for divorce in some denominations, but this is what I would consider the sort of core principle that needs to be that Christianity teaches, and that in any sort of attempt at this lifeboat or this sort of fraternal order, if we will, that would be the norms that I would want to enforce. Now, of course, if you're not a Christian, that's not for you. Obviously, this is only for those that have decided to embrace Christianity. What that does, though, is, well, let me give you an example that's very not Christian. Basically, Mao Zedong was basically an incel until he became emperor of China. And so basically a lot of these revolutionaries, to quote Marcuse and others, sublimated their sexual drives in order to become revolutionaries and overthrow the system. Now, I'm not arguing that we become Maoist revolutionaries and overthrow the system, but it shows you that one of the key principles here is that for success is that if you sublimate this drive towards something constructive, then what you do is you then can better achieve your goals. Now, let me give you an example, right? So let's look at the English Civil War. We have two sides, the Royalists and the Parliament, which is later run by Oliver Cromwell. The Royalists are wine, women, and song, basically good old boys. And then the Parliament eventually gets taken over by Cromwell and his grim Puritan moralists. And they win. We can also look at the French Revolution and the Bolshevik Revolution. And again, aristocrats tend to have this good old boy attitude of wine, women, and song, and they lose. So from my understanding that while this struggle is nowhere near the level of military conflict, that's many on the dissident right say war is the highest form of struggle. They'll quote Mussolini, they'll quote Ebola. Well, okay, if that's the highest form of struggle, then wine, women, and song will get you killed and you lose the war. So for any level of struggle less than that, you're going to have to exercise some control there so that you can develop once you define your victory conditions, strive to get those victory conditions. And so I'll just recap briefly. One, Christian moral ethics is no sex before marriage and no sex outside of marriage. You are with your spouse until your spouse dies, and then you're allowed to marry again within the faith. So that's Christian sexual morality. And then why is it helpful or important to sublimate that sex drive? Well, it allows you to win. Again, I won't go into all the details, but in Cromwell's army, prostitutes were outlawed, and in the army of the Hussites, which had a similar moralistic bent, they would just straight hang you. And they beat, Catholic armies 10 times their number repeatedly. So again, we're not anywhere near that level of struggle. But that's a prerequisite for winning at that level of struggle, especially if you're the underdog, like the Hussites were in Parliament, appeared to be until Cromwell reformed the army.
Thank you, Todd. Red Hawk, no doubt you have some disagreements about tactics, or especially when it comes to no sex before marriage. Please rebut directly the things that you disagree with and proffer the things that you would advise instead.
Right. So I think the best place to start here would kind of lay out, I guess, the RP, the manosphere position kind of on morality. One of the things we say in the space all the time is that the space is amoral. And one of the reasons why we say this is, so what you guys got to understand is that the people that come to the RP, the people that come to the manosphere, nobody is finding this information because things are going well for them. if you were doing fantastic with, with your job, with women, if you were just like a natural, or you had a support group with you or something like that, you're never going to find this information. So you have to understand the kinds of people that we're addressing is, the kinds of people that are lost, the lost boys generation, for any number of reasons, whether they were, divorced guys and they got screwed over by the marriage system, or they're young, incel guys who don't know how to attract women, or they're guys who just don't know how to be masculine because they were raised by women. So one of the things we say in the sphere is that the sphere is amoral. And the reason we say this is because given a guy basically is default, feminine programming these days. And one of the reasons why we give people the amoral stance is because it gives you the idea that the world owes you something. It's basically a covert contract, which is some of the worst things you could possibly have as a guy, especially in relationships with women. So essentially, take a look at Christianity, for example. It's like, okay, if you do XYZ good thing in the world, then ABC good thing will happen to you in the afterlife. Now, you can't prove that in any objective manner. And again, I'm not here to bash on like your own personal beliefs or anything like that. That's not what I'm here to do. I'm just saying that doing good things and getting good results doesn't necessarily, fall forward to the way the world works. Just look at, for example, the people that rule us. Good things happen to bad people all the time. You see it every day. And then bad things also happen to good people, all the time. So your actual actions in the world is not necessarily how the world is going to treat you as a result. And so this is a really big deal when, guys who are lost are coming into this spot basically thinking, oh, okay, if I just adopt this tradcon way of viewing things, and if I just do the things that the Bible tells me to do, then therefore I'm going to get rewarded in a certain way. And that's a very feminine way of looking at things as to the way the world works, because it makes you reliant on somebody else. And you as a man are not reliant on anybody else. You are reliant, first of all, on yourself, because no one's going to take care of you. So this is our objection with people who try to steer guys into like the tradcon sphere when they're like 18, 19, and basically have no means to rely on themselves. They don't have high paying careers. They don't have, a roster of experiences with women to learn from in order to have a successful marriage, in order to keep their women in line. They also don't have, all these other experiences with other groups of men to, basically form these kinds of communities that we'd want to build. So essentially, this is why we say that the space is amoral, basically, because you have to look at everything in the world as to what is good for me, and what necessarily is good for you isn't necessarily going to be good for somebody else. You dating the really, really hot girl in your class or, at your workplace is good for you, but it sucks for the other guy because you've now taken that woman off the table. So basically, you have to understand that, okay, there are things in the world that are going to be bad for other people, but are going to be good for me. Now, I have to think of myself first. It's kind of like enlightened self-interest in the Ayn Rand sense, but I wouldn't go quite so far as to say it's a direct overlap. And so this is my objection to a lot of these things. It's like, listen here, you got to set yourself up first. All right. You can have whatever views you want about the afterlife or anything afterwards, but just sitting back and saying that, having this covert contract with, your priest or in the Bible and God and everything like this is just going to give you a good life here on earth. It just doesn't hold water to me now. And that's my objection with so many of these things, is that get yourself in order, use the tools that work best for you, that you are comfortable with using, and then form the best life you want to live in addition to that. If you want to be Christian, that's totally fine. There are plenty of, resources out there for you to understand, female nature and understand masculinity without necessarily just going out and spinning plates all the time, or fucking anything with two legs, or, cheating on your wife or anything like that. But that's basically going to come down to you. And this is why I don't give shits, because I don't know what your goals are. I don't know what your morals are. I don't know what's good for you. I don't know what's bad for you necessarily, because you are your own person. And I'm just some asshole that's talking on the internet. And what does that make me if I tell you how to go out and do something in the world? My job is to teach you how to think. It's not teaching you what to think. And so I
think that's a good segue point. I'd like to hear Praise of Folly's rebuttal to this, or any other ideas he has that he wants to extrapolate from what you just said. Please, Todd, go.
Okay, so let's go back from the top of it. The highest level of struggle is war. Now, if you want to win, you got to do two things. You've got to act as a single unit. Divided command is suicide and death, and you have to conform your behavior, your moral habits, to a higher level. So the two things that both the royalists in England, the Bourbons in France, and the Romanovs in Russia lacked was unity and self-control. Now, looking at the pillage and looting that happened after the Russian and French revolutions shows that the control that was being imposed was of necessity, and they let it go and they won. The parliamentarians exercised that control into the future. But if you want to win, especially as the underdog, this is one of the prerequisites. You just have to do this. You have to subordinate the ego and the desires of the self to a greater good. For example, many of the revolutionaries in Russia, both anarchist and Bolshevik, were de facto monks, not because of any moral commitment, Mao, for example, but because of their drive to win, their drive to defeat the reactionary forces, and they sublimated that. That's a precondition. The other thing is no man can survive alone. He will die alone, unless you're some trapper like on the frontier. But even then, the odds of you dying are pretty high unless you have a team to help you out. You need the Mannerbund. The Mannerbund doesn't exist. The Mannerbund has been destroyed. So it would have to be informal. It couldn't be a formal Mannerbund, because if it were formal, then the ACLU would shut it down. So it has to be informal so that we can begin to work together to survive, right? Now, I'm not saying that we all share the same values beyond that. But the point is, though, if that's our goal, and I don't think anybody plans on checking out tomorrow, then we need to think like that. We need to think about what survival would entail. And as far as Christianity, while it is true that a large segment of evangelical Christianity is tied up in the prosperity gospel, the idea that if you follow Christ, then you'll be rewarded in this life, that's not what Christ teaches. We don't have to get into that now. But what I would say from my perspective is that the sort of patterns of life that we have to live with and navigate, and especially as we chart into this uncertain future, Christianity, the Bible itself, is a source of a great amount of wisdom that gives us a portion of thousands of years of lived tradition and experience that we can then apply in our own lives in order to best survive the future. So just to briefly recap, one, survival in the struggle, whatever that struggle is against nature for existence, against the state, against the left, whatever. You have to subordinate the ego and the will of the individual, one, to discipline, and then two, to some sort of group identity. Two, the idea then that is you have to then develop those skills and habits in order to be self-controlled, in order to do so. So, for example, in Frank Herbert's Dune, right, one of the ways that Baron Vladimir Harkonnen keeps people under his thumb is he gets them addicted to drugs. And then they're so addicted that if they don't get their fix, they'll go into shock and die. And so he then, pulls them around by the nose saying, well, you want that fix, you don't want to die tomorrow, so you better do what I tell you to do. And any other sort of vice could be written in for that. And then thirdly, Christianity, in the sense that I'm using it for this discussion, while it is a belief set that people who believe it, you either do or you don't, what its practical virtue is that it gives us insights into human nature, and the rhyming, history doesn't repeat itself, it rhymes. But we can sort of look in the history of the nation of Israel and be like, oh, well, they were there before. What did they do to get here? So we're at the peak decadent stage. Well, that's like the prophets Isaiah and Jeremiah. So how do we get through the peak decadent stage?
Okay.
I guess I'm unless you want to say something, yes.
No, please go ahead, Red Hawk.
All right. I do want to push back a little bit. I'm seeing a lot of people in the chat bring this up as well, is that I really, really despise this talking point that's been coming up in a lot of online right circles the past 6 months or so. Basically casting away any sense of individualism as therefore akin to liberalism. And I find that talk extremely anti-male, and I really do not like it. And this is something that BAP has also been hammering on a lot lately as well, and I totally agree with him, is that men are hierarchical. It's in our DNA. It's part of the machine that is absolutely never going to change. So this talk about like, we got to form all these groups, we got to help out all the other guys and everything like this. It's like, I only cooperate with people who have actually put in the work. And that's just the way that all male hierarchies have always worked, is that the guys at the top order the guys at the bottom that don't do the work. And so therefore, the argument, I guess, goes these days in online right circles that liberalism is ultimately, the rule of individual free expression. And therefore, because men are, hierarchical, that means individual. So therefore, individuality among men is akin to trannies or some nonsense. I hate this line of thinking. I think it's really dumb. And it's just, you guys just have to acknowledge the fact that, the realities on the ground are how many of us listen to this stream? How many of them are in our community? Let's be generous and say it's, 250,000 people throughout the world. Let's be real generous right there. Okay. So 250,000 people around the world. Let's also be generous and say that 50% of that 250,000 people are actually doing the work and bettering their lives every single day to, be in a position to change anything in the future. All right. You understand what we're dealing with here. We're dealing with concepts of scale here, which is why I don't really deal with these kinds of arguments of, oh, how are we going to do these kinds of things in the future? How are we going to change the system? I'm way more in the camp of letting the system burn itself out. And then if you are a guy who's pretty much at the top of this hierarchy, you're pretty much going to be at the top of anyone's because you've succeeded in arguably the one that is the most anti-male in all of history, the one that has the most hurdles and obstacles laid out in front of you. So if you're going to thrive in this marketplace, you're going to thrive in pretty much any of them, as far as I'm concerned. So that's kind of more my goal here is get guys who are switched on, get them to the top, get them proficient in whatever they want to do. And those guys who are at the top, I mean, they're going to, naturally form groups together. I agree with Todd saying that no man is an island, and it's absolutely ridiculous to expect that, somebody would just be totally off by themselves. But this seems very weird to me, like this logic of, there's this big group of incels or whatever, and therefore we need to lift them up a bunch. It's like, no, I'm for giving them resources to lift themselves up. And then, if they're showing me that they're doing the work, I will help them along the way. But it's very weird to me. I'm not a men's rights activist is basically what I'm saying to that extent. I'm not interested in, leveling the playing field to speak of all men, because some men are better than others, and it's not exactly what Todd's saying, I know, but this is just what I'm seeing a lot of these arguments that other people are making come from.
Okay. Then what I would like to go to next then here is if Red Hawk believes that providing the tools and the way of thinking to help men succeed and create their own hierarchy, that seems to be amoral. Now, Todd believes that morality needs to be baked in from the beginning, correct, Todd?
Yes.
Okay. I would like Todd to speak now why he believes that it is flawed to encourage men to build hierarchy in an amoral way, and I would like him to explain why he has problems on a moral, ethical level with what Red Hawk has proposed, and why he thinks that will be detrimental to a hierarchical or surviving community. And then I would like to hear Red Hawk's rebuttal to what Todd says after that. Todd, please go.
Right. So, first of all, the idea that it's sort of like in the market where you provide a service, right? Your goal is not to isolate your customers. You want to have as wide a net as possible. And so from a certain marketing perspective, this makes sense. And many on the RP community will admit that. Which again, no harm, no foul, right? You admitted that's what you're doing, and you're doing it. But here's the problem, right? If we want to move beyond that to something more, we end up with a problem. Other than a sort of technical knowledge of how to navigate certain struggles in the modern age, there's nothing else binding that community together. So Machiavelli in The Prince talks about the 4 great ancient prophet founders. Moses, Cyrus the Great, actually 5, Numa, Solon, and Theseus. Now, they all started with a moral set of principles that they claim to have gotten from God or the gods. In modern times, we'll often see philosophies rooted in a kind of rationalism, libertarianism, Marxism. And then you start from that principle and then you work out. One of the advantages that has is it leads to success. Right? Whatever any of us in this room thinks about Marxism, it's a sort of default that many on the left will go to. There's default to Marx in a way that on the right, there's really nobody that we just default to. And it has tremendous power to allow for group formation for success because what we've seen is that the right, Dave recently said in his 2020 year-end review video, which is, I think, a couple of days ago, that the left is crazy and the right can't win. Yeah, why can't the right win? Because the right can't get along because there's too many cooks and not in the kitchen, or too many chiefs and not enough Indians. And the question is, okay, how would we even begin building a sort of identity that will last over time and move to a higher level of survivability? Well,
so let me pause you there, Todd. What you're saying to Red Hawk is, how are we to succeed if there is not a shared moral framework or some kind of community or communal moral ethical identity that we can share? You are making a pragmatic approach for there being an ethos, not necessarily Christianity itself. Do I understand you correctly?
That is correct.
Then I would like now to turn that over to Red Hawk. Red Hawk, what do you have to say about that?
I guess on the face of it, I don't exactly have a objection, because obviously, like, if you're gonna have any successful nation, community, whatever you want, what have you, you do need a founding myth, founding ethic, everything to actually keep people together, to have the kinds of society that we want to build. My response is that kind of twofold. One, I don't exactly find it super productive to be thinking in this way, because we aren't really in a position to be thinking in this way yet. In the sense of what I mean is that, how often does some kind of faction battle on the right occur? Pretty much weekly. You'll have Christians arguing with Baptists. You'll have multiple Christian factions fighting with pagans. You'll have issues abound. That I don't need to get into anymore here. So how are we going to unite this group of people? That's way higher than my pay grade right there. So again, like, I find so much of this conversation just getting diluted into big brain, big picture kinds of things that, while it's a good idea, I find so much of this kind of stuff just kind of grows organically from the situation that arises, as opposed to being thought of ahead. I take much more of like much of what AA has been saying with much of his elite theory stuff. I'm not entirely convinced that the ideology needs to be thought of before we, take over. If that is indeed what's going to happen, I feel like it's just going to be organic within the situation. I find it that it's going to be almost impossible for us to, kind of make these plans ahead of time. And I'm just kind of for the, I guess I would call it decentralized approach kind of deal. I'm open to all different kinds of ideas. There's guys that want to go, parallel society with us. There's guys that want to attract elites. There's guys that just want to, be left to go alone and grill and go and like homestead and leave the cities, So I'm open to all these kinds of ideas. I don't know. It's I find it really difficult for this idea that we're all just going to rally behind one idea when, I don't know. It's above my pay grade is basically what I'm saying.
Okay, so with Red Hawk's statements there, Todd, we seem to have come to an impasse. I believe Red Hawk is saying that he believes that we do not have the capability of enforcing any type of shared ethical moral code. And so he believes that we are at a point where we must be in survival mode, and that means empowering men to be successful men, and whatever hierarchy or structure comes afterwards, whether it be the correct one by the Christian lens or any other ethical lens, is better than what we have now. Would you agree with that summation, Red Hawk?
Yeah, more or less, for sure. Then I'm not opposed to, if Christians were to win and take everything over, I'm not opposed to that at all. I'm not opposed to, any kinds of parallel white well-being communities, and then people forming those. I'm not opposed to any of these ideas. It seems, again, like putting the cart before the horse, saying we need this great big unifying grand plan at the rate that things are accelerating and at the rate that we currently just don't really have the manpower at all to make these kinds of things come about. I think it's a good idea that we should be moving to those, goals. And I think there's guys in our community all over the world that are working towards those kinds of things. But just to unify it all under one, guy, it's like, who's going to do that? I mean, who has the power? Who's got the authority, to actually go about and do that? It's just, I think the biggest issue we're tackling with here is kind of like, community versus, a self-determination, basically. It's like, is it better for me to, work really hard to, perhaps maybe bring about this great idea that we're all working for, or is it better for me to just work on myself and get myself in order, and then hopefully once I have that under control, I can help other guys who are doing the same to form these kinds of communities that we want to build. But I've been talking too long. Todd, go ahead.
Todd, I'd like to hear your rebuttal to that, and then I have a question as a follow-up that will go to both of you. So please.
Well, first of all, I'm going to thread the needle and just tell Red Hawk that this is my frame. This is my frame for long-term success and collaboration with people in the future. So it's just a different frame. So we'll start with that. But what I'll say is this. When we look at a problem that's brewing over time, one of the things that we see today is that people expect a lot of immediate results, and that's partly because of technology and media, and we think that we can get instantaneous results when we really can't. Also, the kind of society that we would like to see, we may not actually ever live to see. But there are steps that need to be taken at this moment in time if anybody's going to see that future. A good example of this would be the medieval monks in Ireland and Great Britain during the quote Dark Ages, from around 400 to 800 AD. They kept alive these principles and these ideals against barbarian invasion and pillaging and everything, but they were able to then keep that around long enough in order to transfer it to a generation that could actually use it for betterment for its own good. And so that's where I see ourselves that we're in now. Now, again, where Red Hawk and I would agree is that, he's his man, I'm my man. We have different frames and we have different goals. But I personally believe that survival is best maximized by not pulling the ladder up so that betas can't make it in. They otherwise are talented, competent people, but they just lack that little bit of oomph to get out. And if you can identify a hardworking guy like that, be his mentor, help him out, and then win him over to your side. So,
yeah, I'm not opposed to that by any means. Just to be clear, I think so much of the issues here is that people get like drowned in analysis paralysis, basically. And this is why I bring up kind of like one of the statistics I love to bring up is just the simple fact that 75% of Americans are overweight or obese. So if you're just at like a normal weight, you're already setting yourself like leaps and bounds ahead of your competition. So it's like, yes, you can go out and help other like-minded people. Absolutely. There's no issue with that. But, I just want to make it clear that I'm not advocating for just exactly, pulling the ladder up behind me. That's not exactly what I'm saying. What I'm saying is like, I can't help you climb it. I can leave it there and point it to you. But another thing here, and one of the other things that's kind of the issue with this conversation is that being a guy who's in the manosphere and being a person who sees the forums and everything that we go to, there's maybe 1 in 10 guys that actually get to the space to actually do work, that actually go in and put things into practice and actually, better their lives. The other 9 out of 10 just want to sit there and bitch and complain and wish things were better. So that's what I'm saying. It's like, it is actually easier than ever, to separate yourself from the sludge because everybody else just sucks so much. So I just really want to stress that to people.
Okay. Now I'd like to get to my question to the both of you. We've spoken tonight about the individual. We've spoken tonight about the individual's frame, and each person here speaking, Todd and Red Hawk, have spoken their piece on, I think the best way to say it would be, well, let me think of the right way to say this. Each of the two men here tonight has spoken about the why. Now we're going to talk about the what. I want to start with Todd. When it comes to instilling a shared moral set, now, of course, this is not part of what Red Hawk talks about at all, but we're going to get to him in just a minute. I would like to start with Todd. Tell us the what now. When it comes to what you advise men to do, to say, to build in themselves and in those immediately around them, what exactly do you recommend they do that would be different from what Red Hawk and the Manosphere suggests through your moral, ethical lens? And after you state those particulars, we'll give Red Hawk some time to pick through them and decide whether he agrees or not, and say what he would proffer instead.
Right. So sure. So I'll begin with the assumption again that this is a more broad-based ethic, not narrowly Christianity. So a classic example of what I'm talking about is Stoicism, right? So it's a moral philosophy that we see exhibited by both pagans, Christians, and the founding fathers. So, for example, George Washington was a Stoic. It's this sort of like universal overlay that, you might be a pagan, you might be a Christian, you might be an atheist, you might be whatever, but that's something that can speak to you directly, regardless of your faith or lack thereof, and also creates a shared bond with other men based on that assumption. Now, that's just one philosophy that I point to. There could be others. Platonism is often one that does that. And what you do then is, once you have that, the first thing is to get it, right? Now, in any sort of healthy, well-formulated society, what I want to see is a sort of pedagogy. And a lot of this pedagogy is done through history, right? So originally you'd read the historical records. So, for example, Plutarch wrote a list of biographies, lives of Greeks and Romans. Why was he read? As an example for people to learn from, right? You learn from the good and the bad of all of these, quote, heroes, and just the way the classical individuals learn from the heroes of myth and legend. So Alexander the Great slept with a copy of the Iliad under his bed and LARPed as Achilles and took over the world. And then, Patton and MacArthur LARPed as Roman generals, Roman patricians, and they were the best allied commanders of World War II. And so you first familiarize yourself with both the philosophies of the classical world and the men who we have accounts of their lives, and then learn from that and say that there's this sort of common sense of manhood, which in the Roman is called virtu, which we get the word virtue, which is not just man's physical capacity to procreate and to generate, but also to do actions in the world with other men. And so part of virtue is being able to interact with other men in a constructive fashion to build society. So I'll leave it there.
Okay, Red Hawk, I'd like to hear your response to that, please. And if you'd like to elaborate more on the question I asked originally, please do.
Yeah, I mean, much of what Todd said there, I don't really have an objection with. With senses of stoicism and such like that, I definitely do think it could be, very productive and such. It just kind of keeps going back to, I don't exactly know like who's going to be the one that's going to be in charge to force these things upon people. This kind of centralized idea, like, oh, okay, say we go with stoicism or something like that. And I know that that's not exactly what Todd is pointing out here, but I'm just using it for the example here. Is that okay? So we are going to be, convinced to, go to this, unified central idea. I mean, I don't know. Maybe we're coming at this from two different ways. Maybe I'll just question this to Todd here. Do you kind of think that, we, whatever this group may be online here, can have far more of an active role in kind of twisting and turning, the communities that we want to build within our lifetimes? Or do you kind of take up a position kind of like me, where I just basically accept that the collapse is coming? There's basically nothing we could do about it to stop that, but there are plenty of things we could do to thrive basically amongst ourselves. I guess, would you directly object to kind of something that I'm saying that, oh, okay, we've got a bunch of guys who, are just at the top, and men at the top just always side with other men at the top. It's just been the way that things have been done throughout all of history. So it's like, I mean, look at any country club or any, presidential office or anything like that. They're not meeting with, ditch diggers. They're meeting with other guys who are, the peace movers, so to speak. They're other, business tycoons and things like that. So, I mean, what's to stop, our guys from getting into those kinds of positions? It just doesn't seem necessary to me to have some kind of overarching plan, when all of us are. And the reason I'm thinking this, and sorry if this isn't really coming out, super thought out, but just look at this community already as it is right now. we have a bunch of people who came to this spot in a totally decentralized manner, who have multiple different views on all sorts of different things, who have different skills all over the place. What's the issue with having that at scale, basically at the top, when, okay, so you got guys like us, get really successful in their careers, get really successful with women, get really successful with, politics or whatever it is that they want to do. If we could just have a decentralized group at the top, eventually when people like that get there, is my point. Would you object to that, or what do you think?
Right. So there's a couple of questions here. So I'll answer them in this order. First of all, how do we get to this sort of consensus that Red Hawk's talking about? Well, I think the way to explain it in a way that is going to get the message to stick is the same way you would, Red Hawk. I want people to fall into my frame, and that's my frame. And whatever you would do to get people to fall into your frame, that's what I'm going to do to get people to fall into my frame. And my frame is minimally, we all get to something like stoicism and some sort of classical ethics. Now, obviously, I'm a Christian. I'm going to take that a little bit further. But, we have to get along with each other despite our different beliefs. That has been the case in the past. In the American Revolution, whether you were Catholic, Protestant, Jewish, or secular, and they had all four groups in various levels of leadership, they agreed on that. And they worked together on those shared assumptions, and they defeated the British. So that's number one. Number two, as far as the collapsing society coming, okay, so let's say worst case scenario, we all buy the farm because society crashes on our heads. One could, enjoy the decline, wine, women, and song. And one could sit with a thumb up his ass, and the other one could do what I'm doing. Well, if in the end we all don't make it, it doesn't matter. But if on the chance that we do make it, and making it through this bottleneck looks something like what I'm advocating, then I think that's worth my time within my frame. So that's what I'd say.
Yeah, and I wouldn't have any objections to that. My only objection would be, I guess, you know what, Todd, I'll side with you here. They come to me first, and then they go to you after they're done with me. How about that?
Like I said, the RP serves a very valuable role. I've always said that the RP is correct on certain things. To the extent that I criticize the RP at a systematic level, it's that it doesn't go further. Now, again, maybe that's not the RP's goal. Fine. But what I'm saying is at least we need to be aware of the need to go to the next level. And that's a compromise that I think we can run with.
Yeah.
Okay, good.
If I'd like
Sorry,
to say
Red Hawk, go ahead.
Yeah, one last thing real quick. I mean,
sure.
Just to talk about really quick about why the RP doesn't necessarily go forward is because we tried to go forward and it failed. The Promise Keepers launched a march with 900,000 men on Washington, D.C. in 1993. And the fact that nobody knows about it in the chat is a pretty good indication that it failed miserably. This is kind of what the RP tried to do in the past, is get a kind of mass movement of men to kind of demand, their rights. A populist illusion, if you will, is essentially what happened. And it didn't make much of a difference. So we've kind of now come around to the, solution, even though the sphere itself doesn't necessarily have end state goals as such, because again, it's a amoral space. And we don't really have an overarching goal. It's not what we are. We're not an ideology. We're a praxeology. But that's just my point of it. I'm not opposed to the kinds of things that Todd is saying. I'm just not entirely convinced that this is something that everybody should be thinking about. Guys at the top, go ahead. Think about these kinds of things. What communities you want to build and all these kinds of stuff, and attract other people to you to, join you in these communities that you think are going to last in the long term. And people can have the choice to come and join you. I think all those are fantastic ideas. I just don't exactly think it's super healthy for everybody to be thinking these grandiose big brain plans, even though they are, very helpful.
Okay. So in regards to the title of the stream, Which Way, Young Man? I think that it's safe to say, and I'll let you both rebut this here, that what Red Hawk is proposing is that the Red Pill community, the Manosphere types, they provide a baseline triage for all the ones coming into the emergency room. Todd is a general practitioner of medicine in this regard, who wants to prescribe things that he thinks will give you the best chance to heal and to grow and to be a better man for those who, for the 1 out of 10 that Red Hawk mentioned, that want to take a that want to take firm, bold steps to improve themselves. So perhaps the disagreement here is not necessarily that these two men think they are at odds with one another, but that they are functioning at different levels of the forming hierarchy of whatever is to come next. What do you two think about that? Am I onto something here?
I'll just say that I'm positioning to be in the hierarchy above Red Hawk. That's all I'm saying.
I think the best way to summarize it would just essentially be that if I was to describe it as an RPG character, Todd and I are just putting our skill points in different areas. It's not necessarily to say that one is better for the other. It just comes down to, essentially what you want, which again is just the central idea of all that the red pill is just what do you want. So I've got no issues with, on like a principle level that what Todd is saying. I just disagree with, level of importance, I would say.
Okay, so the final question for tonight, which I hope leads to some good discourse, is Todd has made the point, or has brought up the point, of the necessity of shared beliefs, ethnicity, religion, that galvanize a minority together to have success. One of the things that he mentioned was the depriving of self of debauchery and indulging in carnal need. Now, from the amoral, religiously neutral standpoint of the manosphere, I know from interacting with you and the people around you, Red Hawk, that there seems to be very little pushback against most kinds of what Christians especially would consider unhealthy levels of sexual degeneracy and the proclivities around how women are treated and quote unquote used. So I would like Todd to go first and tell Red Hawk and the audience here why you think it's necessary at the triage level to have some bar of morality that tells the lowest entry-level men it is wise to eschew multiple sexual partners, casual sex, because I know that in the manosphere, that kind of thing is encouraged to help men learn women or to get good, so to speak. So I would like to hear the moral, tradcon, religious, ethical approach from you, Todd, about why you think there needs to be some kind of morality enforcement or gatekeeping on sexual behavior at the baseline level. I'd like to hear you talk about that. Then I would like to hear the arguments and agreements from Red Hawk after that. So take 5-6 minutes and tell us what you think about that, Todd.
Right. So let me just put it this way. I'll open with a joke and then get more serious. I wouldn't want to be the one with multiple STDs when antibiotics run out. Let's just start there. That's going to be real bad. But let's get to some practical details. I've said this before, and I'll say it again. In the highest struggle, which is war, those that can control their loins the best win. Mao beat the Chinese government, both the nationalists, and he didn't have his harem until after he took over. In fact, he was an incel. The royalists won, the parliamentarians won in the Civil War. And then, of course, the artificial control imposed by the revolution lasted only as long as the revolution in France and Russia, but it was enough to win. So ultimately, I'm going to make a practical argument. If you want to win, you have to do this. This is something that you just have to understand. Samurai wrote about this. Generally, if you were, sleeping around, knocking people up before a battle, your performance was going to be less than during the battle. Heck, it's in Rocky. I think it's Rocky 2. When Rocky 2 is about to fight, his Jewish coach says, "Don't knock up the woman. It's going to make your legs wobbly." If you want to win, and again, whether it's boxing or war, you're going to have to exercise some self-control here. Now, or in this case, winning is a pretty low bar. It's just surviving. And so, from a practical point of view, and this would go for other vices as well, such as drink and so on and so on. A good example is there's this thinking, which again permeates the entire dissident right. It goes back to Jack Donovan's The Way of Men. He says that there's a distinction between being a good man, i.e. moral, ethical, and then being good at being a man, which is like it would basically emphasizes a lot of the things that the classical virtue of courage would be, killing wild animals, fighting in wars, cutting down trees, and all that stuff. I'd strongly disagree with Jack Donovan on this point, because you actually have to be a good man to be good at being a man. So, for example, if you lacked the virtue of temperance, and you were an alcoholic, and you were, smashed on watch, and the enemy attacks your camp, well, you were not good at being a man, and that was because of your moral failing of drink. And let's say that before the fight, you went to a bunch of prostitutes, and you were not on your A game, and you lost the battle. Well, again, samurai knew this. Other warrior traditions knew this. That's a moral failing that causes you to lose. So I don't think that you can be good. And furthermore, the highest virtue, prudence, which is doing the right thing for the right reason at the right time, is a prerequisite for any competitive struggle. You have to know what that is. And so I don't think you can nice and neatly divide being good at being a man and being a good man.
So just to clarify before we turn it over to Red Hawk, you believe that moral enforcement and a moral code around what you would call being a good man, comes before being good at being a man, because if you lack the former, you will stumble and falter and not become the latter. That's what you're saying.
Well, yes and no. I mean, courage is a virtue too, so it all hangs together. It's what Plato calls the unity of the virtues. You need all of them to be fully expert.
Well, for the question at hand, it's about sexual behaviors. That's what this is about. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Red Hawk, I would like you to respond to that, please. Take 5-6 minutes and respond.
Sure. So I guess the best place to respond here is kind of to start at the very beginning here and basically lay out where my position is coming from. And I'm going to disagree a lot with most of the trads and probably most people listening to this right at the start with, the position of where I'm starting with. And the position where I'm starting with is the simple fact of the history of humanity is that human beings are naturally polygamous. We are not naturally monogamous. However, Western civilization was founded on monogamy for good reasons, and it's very successful for building civilizations. But this was a tool that was developed for civilizational purposes. This is not the default, operating system of human beings. And why was this system developed? Well, the system was developed because we developed something called agriculture, where we could settle down and actually start building communities and started, accumulating property. And if you were to start accumulating property, it actually forms a, sense of a hierarchy. And when you have a hierarchy, that means that all the women are going to start accumulating at the tops of those hierarchies. Well, you can't really have a civilization if you just have one guy who's stealing all of the women, as what was traditionally done in our hunter-gatherer societies. So in order to compensate for that, we developed things like marriage to, basically keep the guys at the top in check. And this was developed for the course and the prosperity of civilization. Unfortunately, in the 1960s, something came about that was called the birth control pill. And that basically threw out this old system out the window. And we are still struggling with how we're going to respond to that to this day. And so that's your biggest problem with this. What you have now is that even though all the things that Todd just said are correct, the issues are that, okay, his example of like, well, you need to be, you don't need to have sex before the battle because you're not going to be able to perform. Well, warfare is conducted with drones now, so that's kind of moot. Even though he's correct, it's kind of moot just the way that the world is now. Traditionally, women would have to rely on men in order to survive, basically. Now they don't have to. We've got, the police. We've got firearms. We've got the Industrial Revolution that allows women to actually go out into the workforce and everything like this. So essentially, as far as I'm concerned, humanity is a separate species from, 1960 onwards. It's just a simple fact of the matter. So how are we going to deal with things as it stands now? Now, is it true that for, a long, prosperous, monogamous society, is it a bad idea for women to be sleeping around with a bunch of men? Is it bad for guys to not marry, not have kids, and just spend all their time spinning plates? Yes, that is bad for, the prosperity of a Western civilization like the ones that we've grown up in. And you can just compare and contrast this with, competing civilizations like Islam, like India, where polygamy has pretty much been the norm throughout their entire history. And their societies don't tend to be as stable as the Western world ones are. So our problems here are kind of just the waters that we swim in, essentially, and this is kind of where I'm coming from in the sense of, well, you kind of have this new paradigm that is presented to you, something that nobody else throughout all the course of human history has, had to deal with. And so how are you going to deal with it? Well, the old world stuff just isn't going to work because we don't live in those times. Essentially, at this point, we're kind of going back to our animal instincts at this point, because all the shackles of, civilization that we needed in order to survive are no longer there for us. I mean, and this is the problem that you have. So do you want to prosper, or do you want to, be saddled with these old norms and everything that just, quite frankly, don't really work anymore? I'm predicting into the future here, and so are many other people like Morgan Stanley, that 50% of women in the West are just going to be single and childless. And there's nothing that any of us can do to fix that kind of stuff. So it's basically goes down to, what do you want? And I don't really have the answers for all of this, but it's not my position to have all the answers. My position is just to give you guys the tools to form the best kind of life that you want. And so, again, I agree, like the whole thing in this conversation, I agree with so many of the, the base points and the end goals and everything like this. But the problem just is that we're living in new times. So we have to come up with something new. We can't just go to the past, because, quite frankly, the past is gone. And
okay, that's a good transition point. Todd, next to you, I want to put this question that Red Hawk brought up. I assume that you agree with the things that he said, yes, about the birth control pill and things changing and we being in new waters. Yes, you agree.
A lot of things have changed, yes.
Yeah. Okay. So as a moral man, one who is a Christian, do you think that the human condition has changed to the point to where the ethical push for you should limit your sex, you should not be sexually promiscuous, and this will benefit you? Do you think that is true still?
I do.
Then I would like to hear a rebuttal to what Red Hawk said through your personal lens, and why you believe that adhering to what he calls the old way is still valid and should be enforced.
Right. So let's run with the idea that things are changing. Women are getting burned at both ends of the candle now. At the elite level, we have trans women. Men are now competing in women's sports and going to women's bathrooms. The state is turning a blind eye to some, not all men, right, but some who are taking advantage of that legal privilege they have. And they're getting burned at the bottom because certain crime statistics not real because of the skin color of the people that do it. Now, I'm going to take TFM's point here and say, take your ball and go home. Who's going to be able to wait out longer? The women getting burned at both ends of the wick and the police looking the other way because nothing's going on. That's a woman in the bathroom. Shut up. And don't talk about that black gangster because that's racist. Or some guy who's, red pilled and awake and is waiting outside trying to do something else. That's the first thing I'll say. The second thing that I'll say is what I've been trying to get at this whole night is, if we look at civilization and falling societies, when the Roman Empire fell, everybody didn't die. There were still people that survived in Western Europe and moved on into the next age. The question then is, and this happens in other empires when the Han Chinese fell or whatever, the question is, what lasts? What do we have to be ready to survive? Lee Kuan Yew told us, family. Family, and what he meant by that was extended kinship groups, because in Asia, that's still far more important than in America. That is the only thing that survives. So you either build that and survive, or you don't. I mean, maybe you get really, really lucky, but otherwise you're just not going to. So what I'm saying is, well, all of these things are certainly against our natural inclinations. Certainly they're very difficult to do. It's really doing it and making it past the bottleneck, or not doing it and not making it past the bottleneck. It's more existential than that.
Okay. So
I guess... go ahead,
sorry.
guys. Sorry. No, go ahead.
Oh, I'm about to pass it back to you anyway, Red Hawk. So in light of what he said, and Todd, I'll let you check me on this before I give it to Red Hawk. Todd, would you recommend then that some kind of message that you just delivered about family, responsibility, self-control, that kind of nature around sexual behavior should be at the baseline introductory level in the Red Pill manosphere for optimal success? Is that a good summary of what you just said?
Yeah.
Then Red Hawk, it comes to you. Do you agree with that?
For the sake of, I mean, this is the other like really hard part about this conversation. Is like I really don't like dealing in in shoulds, basically, because again, it just goes back to what I was saying earlier about, it basically just does, come down to what you want. Because I mean, while Todd's trying to thread a needle in this conversation, I'm also trying to thread a needle in the sense of being part of like the red pill and the manosphere community. We don't have shoulds, we don't have like overarching ideas, because it's just antithetical to what the space is. But also at the same time, I do have my own political views and my own wishes for, a nice and prospering society. So it's kind of like a catch-22 in these discussions where it's like, does the red pill do this? Well, the red pill might not do this, but I myself would do this. You understand? So it's kind of like I don't know. It gets a little difficult. Maybe like semantics for people who aren't involved in the space, but I just try and keep it on point is all I'm trying to say.
So then, to understand what you're saying, then I'm going to try to paraphrase you just for clarity here, just like I did with Todd. You believe that perhaps it is not a good idea to have this kind of ideal or moral enforcement as part of baseline red pill manosphere, part of the beginning of the praxis of what it is you do, because you think it is negative to some men and it would run some away or turn them away. I'm not exactly hearing why you think that it's not. It's why you disagree with what Todd proffers.
It's just, again, like what I in my personal life agree with what Todd is saying. Yes. Does the manosphere and the red pill say this? No, it does not. And the reason it doesn't say that is just simply because it's a set of tools. It's not an ideology. It's not 12 rules for life. It's not, a code of laws or anything like that. It's just simply not what it is. And that's why, like, as part of this community that has been worked on for almost 20 years at this point by men who I'm basically standing on the shoulders of giants, it's not my responsibility to then try and, backwards, weasel in like, like the red pill means this because I say it does,
Understood.
Like, yeah. So that's just what I'm saying. So it's like a lot of the things in this conversation, like, yes, I do think the red pill can be useful for you if you want to go into these certain circumstances and, like we were talking about earlier, like stoicism or even like forming families. Can the red pill be helpful for you in those circumstances? Absolutely, it can. But that comes down to you as to what you want. You'll never find, a red pill textbook saying, oh, you have to be Christian and then you have to do XYZ things in order to have a good life. You're never going to find that. So that's just what I'm saying. We're kind of getting, bogged down in the minutia here, but yeah.
Well, that's one of the things that this stream is for, because we are all, whether directly or tacitly, part of the Old Glory Club that's forming. We are part of many circles of friends that meet in person, and we consider ourselves to be influential for building the communities and the idea structures that hopefully will take over as the evil empire begins to decline. And so as part of that, we must have some kind of shared frame or we can't clear them out. Because it takes, as Todd lined out and as how I have laid out on other streams, you need some kind of motivated unity that is bound together by ethos, motivation, some kind of moral structure. And so to push our ideals and create real communities with real power that can actually have a chance to make it through the storm that's coming, I think that what Todd has said tonight would suggest that perhaps there needs to be an evolution of the red pill praxis to include, even if it's not particularly Christian, some kind of moral addition to it to instill what we have talked about tonight. That I know that you personally, Red Hawk, agree with a lot of the things that Praise of Folly has shared, even if that's not part of the typical red pill manosphere community stuff. So my question then to the both of you is, do you think there should be an evolution from the last 20 years of manosphere red pill stuff that we co-opt and we create to be part of what it is we are building? And could the options of which way, young man, be fused into one that works for our goals? Which one of you would like to take that first?
Can I go first, Red Hawk?
Ooh, I'd really, really like to.
Okay,
but
go ahead.
I would say unequivocally no. The manosphere needs to stay amoral. It needs to stay a-religious. It needs to stay apolitical as much as possible, because the sphere is limited to two things and two things only. It is, a positive male identity and male sexual strategy, and that's literally it. So anything more than that, just corrupts the space it just evolves it into places that we don't want it to go. Your question is about fusing these two things together. Well, they kind of already are. You can be, red pill aware and still be Christian. You can be politically on the right. You can be politically on the left. It's because it's a praxis. It's a set of tools. It's teaching you how to think. It's teaching you, the kinds of things that are the essence of being a man that would have just, been taught to you in previous times. But because we're living in such
absolutely,
an
I agree
anti-male
about the
world,
praxis, because
Yeah.
that's the same thing as the go free method. It's just that's about race, and the manosphere stuff is about men and men's
Yes.
sexual behavior. I get that.
So
I understand.
Yeah, so that's why I'm saying that no, the manosphere does not need to evolve in this certain place because that's not what it's for.
Okay.
I would still recommend that every man in our spaces, adopts this lens of looking at things, because I think it can only help you as far as I'm concerned. That does
Okay.
not mean that you should go around and sleep with everything. That's up to you. That's your choices. Like you're a man, so it's your job to create a frame for yourself in the world, and that's up to you to decide, not up to me.
Understood.
But you could definitely, these things are not mutually exclusive by any means. I just want to stress that. So go ahead, Todd.
Okay.
Well, first of all, I just want to say that I think Red Hawk is in my frame and doesn't realize it yet, or I'm hopefully trying to pull him into my frame. But the point is this is where I'm a little confused. So I'm gonna ask a question first. In other streams, Red Hawk, you've said, including the one that we were on together with Academic Agent, the idea is, okay, we're just telling men, and Academic Agent said this too, we're just telling men how to survive and flourish and make ends meet in our current age. Okay, now that's, okay, one, is that a stated premise of the red pill community? Because if that is, it has implications down the road. So for example, if we go into a collapse and due to either inflation or lack of productive capacity, you die a painful death at 50 due to gonorrhea because antibiotics are gone, that's not conducive to your long-term flourishing. Is long-term flourishing just the next 5 years of the system, or is it the rest of your life?
Hold on, my mic was screwing up. Sorry. I mean, again, it comes down to what you want. I mean, like, again, this is so difficult to talk about with people in our circles, because everybody here has some kind of ideology that they're, holding themselves together with, whether it's, a religion, whether it's a faith, whether it's, anti-whiteism, or a white well-being. Everybody here is coming and looking at this thing through like an ideological or religious lens. And because you're coming from that position, it's almost impossible for you to view the red pill for what it actually is. Like, again, it is a set of tools. It's literally a toolbox. Okay, so your wife isn't giving you sex. Well, here's a screwdriver, or dread, we like to call it. So this is how you fix this certain problem. This is not it's not a code. It's not, there's no text. There's no central, it's just so far removed from, what like an actual ideology would be, that it's just so difficult for us to have this kind of conversation, because it's just so far removed from it. So it's like, okay, to answer your question, Todd, it's like, oh, do you want success in the next 5 years, the next 50 years? Well, it's up to the individual guy. To use certain tools at certain times and be wise enough and smart enough to know what tools work best in his certain situation with his certain circumstances. It's not helpful for us to give like a 12 rules for life for every single guy, because every single guy is different. Every single guy's got different skills. Every single guy's got different goals. So, I mean, could you use the red pill tools to have a prosperous life and be married for 20 years and have like 10 kids? There are plenty of guys in the space that, have done that. There's guys that are still in their 50s that are out spinning plates and doing night game all the time. You could do that too. That's up to you. Like, I really have to stress this kind of stuff. And I really, really hate it. I really, really hate this kind of stuff in this sphere where everyone just, throws like these kinds of, filler words into things like, oh, this sounds like libertarianism. This sounds like anarchism. This sounds like liberalism, blah, 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 blah. It's like, no, just shut up. That's not what this is. It's literally just a set of tools for you to figure out what it is to, get yourself on the right track in this hellscape of modernity that does not give men any tools at all to succeed in their lives. So that's what this is. It's a space for you to figure out what masculinity is about. It's a space for you to figure out your male sexual strategy. How do you become attractive to women? How do you keep them in line? This isn't like something we're not going to start like a movement of red pill guys who are going to go and like take over the government or something like this. It's just not what it's for. So yes, can you succeed for 20 years by having a long marriage with kids with the red pill? Yes, you can. Can you just, be a spinning plates guy and participate in all sorts of degeneracy for 50 years? Yeah, you can do that too. But again, we don't make moral judgments on people. That's not what the space is for. So yes, Todd, there absolutely could be, but you do need something outside of that, because the red pill isn't going to, just give you a better life in and of itself. You have to put in the work and decide what you want out of your life. So yeah, could there be guys in our spaces that, use a red pill lens to have successful marriages? Absolutely, because they have other morals and other goals and, an actual ideology on top of that steers them in that direction. And that's totally fine. That's their choice. Go for it. I got no issues with that.
Okay, let me rephrase the question if I can, Yiz.
Certainly, go ahead.
I don't think that you can so narrowly, when you say that this movement is directed towards men succeeding, thriving, and flourishing, you're saying a lot more than I think you're saying, because that does not just have an entailment for the next 5 years. That's so if you want to say that this is just a sort of technique, a sort of skill set, a sort of toolbox, okay. But when you use language like that, you're going over into metaphysical grounds of a sort of at least tentative appeal to a higher order morality, which I see this a lot. It sort of seems like a slight equivocation, and I'm just trying to nail this down. Is the red pill trying to cause men to flourish and succeed, which in that case, the long game has to be taken into account. Because if society collapses and you're dying of gonorrhea at 50, that's not succeeding.
No, let me rephrase this other way. It's the sphere is nothing more than guys swapping notes. It's literally what it is. It's what it was founded on. It's what the all the old forums and everything that all the guys came to in a decentralized way. That's what it was all about. I'm having trouble with the XYZ situation. It's like, okay, well, I'm in this part of the country or this part of the world, and I also have XYZ situation. Let's try ABC thing to make something work. So you will find all kinds of suggestions and all kinds of tools for different situations in the manosphere, but you will never find an overall arcing, goal for yourself in that space. There's not like, on r/the red pill, there's not, a 10-step program at the very start says, okay, the goal of this space is for you to get in the gym and bench 200 pounds. And then you have to sleep with 20 women, and then you have to have a wife, and then you have to have 3.5 kids or whatever this is. Like, you'll never find that there. That's not what it is. So if you want to adopt this lens and be like, okay, this is female nature. This is how I was lied to. This is how masculinity, this is your own nature, of your sexual strategy and all your, other goals that you might have. This is what you can do to get what you want out of life, because at the end of the day, you're a man, you're a creature of action. You're inherently an individual creature on top of that as well. So it just goes down to what you want. I mean, like for guys in our space, what they want is to have a prosperous society, ideally with, low numbers of like cuckoldry and stuff like this, to have a high trust society and stuff like that. And that's totally fine. Go ahead and go for that. That's cool. I would encourage people to have those kinds of outlooks on things in the kinds of communities that we want to build. However, it is vitally important for me to go out and say that that is not the goal of the manosphere, because there are no goals of the manosphere. The goal of there's people who come to the manosphere who have goals for themselves.
Could you re-ask the question to me, Yiz? Because I sort of asked another question that I lost the original question you asked me.
The point that we were talking about now is not necessarily a question as much as it is something that I extrapolated from the previous statements you two made. Is I said something along the lines of perhaps Praise of Folly is saying that in the baseline education of the red pilling stuff should be some kind of suggestion about avoiding promiscuity or some kind of baseline moral structure or something And that's what the last little bit was about. It wasn't a direct
Right.
question. It was just something I proffered that I thought would lead to healthy discourse. And it seemed like it did.
Oh, it did. But let me answer it now because I wanted to ask Red Hawk a question. I'll answer that in one of two ways, right? Obviously, you could say in some ideal abstract sense that yes, it should. But then the difficulty is that the red pill community is already entrenched. It already exists. That would be perceived as a hostile takeover by entryists and would probably not work out very well. So on practical grounds, what I would say is what you brought up is some sort of parallel identity which takes the understanding, the true observations of the red pill and incorporates it into this holistic perspective. Because
correct. I wasn't even talking about a Christian lens. I just meant, when I brought up morality, I just meant something in the baseline red pill stuff that would guide men perhaps more towards less promiscuity, like you were talking about earlier. Not necessarily a Christian thing, but please go ahead.
Oh yeah. And this is something that Red Hawk already mentioned earlier in the stream, and I think we can just sort of run with this. He said that he'll bring the people in, and then when he writes his, rational male like Rollo, he'll have a footnote saying, okay, when you finish, here's the next place to go, and then you can direct him to me. That's the compromise. How's that news?
What do you think about that, Red Hawk? How's that sound? Working in tandem.
Hey, I mean, again, the only thing I ever say to people is just be red pill aware, because as far as I'm concerned, it's only a benefit to you. That's all I got to say. If you want to go out and help Todd, build some kind of community in addition to that, go for it. You got my blessing.
So real quick, I have to say this is, I know you're not going to interact with the chat, but I will. Big Brain Content said, Todd wants to port the red pill into the sensible center. Bingo. I'm the sensible center. That's what I'm doing. That's what I'm doing. I'm going to have the sensible center position of stoicism and self-control and philosophy. That's going to be like the base. That's the sensible center. The normies won't get scared. It's great. It's great. Thanks, Big Brain Content.
For those of you that don't know, the sensible center meme started over with Academic Agent, where we said we need to rebrand being any kind of right wing or far right or whatever, and since we want sensible things like don't teach about butt sex to 5-year-olds and don't put drag queens in front of kids and that kind of thing, that we're actually the sensible center. We're not extreme or radical anything. So it's been kind of a meme the last few weeks to call ourselves the sensible center. So I didn't want that to ruffle anybody's feathers who is particularly married to the left-right dichotomy there. So with that being said, we're going to move now to the final segment of the stream. Before we do community engagement, and there's a few questions, people asking both Todd and Red Hawk some things that we're going to get to. I would like each of you to give a closing statement of why what it is you specialize in, or the types of things you've talked about now for any young men or anyone who might be a parent of a young man listening, why the things you've shared are the most important for the success of that man. And we're going to start with Red Hawk.
I'll just keep it short and sweet and basically just lay out that in this modern world that is vehemently anti-male, specifically vehemently anti-white male, as we all know, you basically have nowhere else left. The church has largely been subverted by feminism. The government certainly has been. The society, the media, everything absolutely has been. There basically are no male spaces left. And it is vitally important that we do hold on to one of the only ones that is actually left, that is the manosphere, that is a male space that understands male issues, and it can actually help you to develop the kind of life that you want for yourself. And that's why it's important. That's why it must remain, true to what it was founded as: guy swapping notes, positive male identity, and that's it. So that's all I got to say on it. Go for it. Adopt a lens. Do what you want to do with your life. You can absolutely use it to get a girlfriend. You can use it to get a wife. You can use it to have a healthy relationship with your wife and your kids if you already have one. Go for it. That's all I'll say. You're a man. You're an individual. You're a creature of action. So go and take some action.
Understood. Todd, your closing thoughts and your what you would like to leave with men and parents of young men.
Okay, so I'll start off with just saying that as a preface to all that I've said, what I want is I'm reaching out to people to fall into my frame to work on building an identity, institutions that can survive the impending catastrophe, or what you want to call it, the collapse or whatever, and however you
I think a
that
healthier way
collapse.
to call it is just the decline of the empire.
Yeah, the
It's just
decline of
we're
the empire.
experiencing decline. We can't. Well, none of us can see the future, so we can't say there's some horrific catastrophe immediately around the corner. But we definitely all agree that we are in some kind of societal decline. So we'll just call it that.
Sure. And that, with that regard, right, we're all coming from different. Many on the alt-right talk about the idea of ethnogenesis, the idea of a new identity. Well, that new identity hasn't been created yet, and obviously, I'm under no illusions that a lot of these differing belief systems are going to go away. But as a precondition for any sort of healthy, constructive behavior, I'm going to, Sam Hyde return with a V to the classical virtues. That's a precondition I think not only we can all agree on to move forward. In the past, like I said, the American Revolution, there were Jews, Catholics, Protestants, and non-believers, and they at the elite level agreed on those principles and those values, and that held them together long enough to start a new country.
Okay, understood. I would like to make a single closing statement here about what we've learned tonight. We have learned that there is a bone of contention between not just Red Hawk and Todd on a few things, but in the dissident sphere of people who care about morality and religion, namely Christianity, those who care about tradition versus those who may be more forward-thinking and think that we should adapt and create new behaviors and new tactics, such as what Red Hawk represented tonight. But it's important to remember that, like both of these men here have said tonight, we're all different, and men are individuals that compete against each other, form the Mannerbund, or form fraternity, and from that, a hierarchy that is necessary for the successes that we've seen the world over, but especially in the white man's country, that is necessary. And both of these men here tonight have made points of morality, personal stoicism, personal success that I think are not necessarily in contradiction to one another, but hopefully we have brought some light into why people of a Christian moral tradcon variety and people of the manosphere variety butt heads, and hopefully everyone listening has gotten some better insight as to where these arguments come from and how you can diffuse them if it's causing trouble in your friend group or causing friction in the spheres that you're in. So would both of you agree with that closing statement of mine?
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. Well, then we are going to move to community engagement and round out the stream. So just to remind you guys, all of the links have been shared in the chat. They are also in the YouTube video description, as well as the Odyssey video description. Entropy, Cash App, PayPal, and Subscribestar. Get your comments in now. And if you'd like to ask something but don't want to spend the money, you can use the question widget over on Entropy, and we'll get to those last. So we're going to start with Entropy, but first I need to fire up Cash App on my phone and refresh PayPal over here, as well as Subscribestar, which I meant to do earlier, but I got so enthralled in the conversation, I forgot. So if you'll bear with me just a moment. All right, refreshing, and opening them up. Cash App now. And we have a lot of things to get to over on Entropy, at least 4 or 5. So the way this is going to work is I'm going to read the questions that people ask, and they will likely be phrased to each of you. And it will be between the two of you to decide who goes first. So there we go. Boy, Cash App is being really slow tonight. All right, well, I'll just leave that cooking for now. All right, over on PayPal, we have nothing new. So if you've sent something in the last moment, I will check again before the end of the stream. We have no new tips on Subscribestar, no hyper chats on Odyssey, and we're going to move directly to Entropy now. These are going to go in the chronological order that they were asked. All right. Hunger Merchant, our friend Hunger that we all know, for $15 US, comes in and says, "Thank you for hosting this, Yiz. I know both of these guests to be excellent gentlemen, and I look forward to a sensible discussion." Well, I did my best to deliver on a sensible discussion, and I saw no fault in the behavior of either of my guests. They behaved themselves perfectly, and I think we had a good discussion.
I agree. Red Hawk was a gentleman, and as a moderator, you're a gentlewoman, Yiz.
Oh, thank you kindly. Your sweet words do an old eunuch kindness. Thank you. All right. Moving back to Entropy. We have from Heidi Van Buskirk. Oh, good to see you here, Heidi. Good evening, sister. She says, for $3 US, if men are going to survive, what traits should those men have? What traits should the women have? survival is in our nature, of course. What would that look like in today's time? Who'd like to take that first?
If I might take that first. The most important thing to have, or as if you don't have it, find somebody that does, is foresight. So, for example, if you know what's coming before somebody else does, you can get out of the way. Again, it doesn't matter if you're a Samson. If a flood or mudslide is coming your way, you're done. So if you don't have the foresight to see what's coming to get out of the way, find someone who does, because as we go into imperial decline, resources will become more and more scarce. So we're going to have to be more careful how we use resources. And the best way to shepherd resources in future is to plan ahead. And some people are just better at planning ahead than others.
Red Hawk, what would you like to say to that comment?
Yeah, it's definitely a good one. The top put forward there, and I'd very much agree. I think God, what would be some other really good ones? I'm trying not to think of just the obvious ones, like getting in, physical shape and stuff like that. But I think I would say as well that I don't know, to take a line from our friend Prudentialist, I would say prudence is definitely up there as well.
Oh, that's a good one. Yeah, that's good.
And stoicism as well, I think, is very helpful for you too. I've been talking about this quite a bit on Twitter recently as well, is that I've definitely been taking a break, from much more of the political content and such on the last 6 months or so. And I think it's just a much more healthy, thing for you to be doing, to not be, stressing out about low politics all the time. I know people in our spaces are, pretty on point with that stuff, not being involved with the low stuff because we just know how bad things are basically. But yeah, I think stuff like that is very, very, healthy for you to be thinking about. And then I guess, more of the stuff that many people in this space have been talking about, just don't atomize yourself, find more like-minded people, even if they're normies, just having, in-person interactions with people in your everyday life is just going to make a hell of a difference for you.
I agree. And my response to that, she also asked about what traits for women. And I think that if you are a young woman listening, or you're a parent of a young woman, an important thing to instill in her would be wise judgment and knowing what it is to be feminine and knowing what it is to be a healthy female actor in a healthy civilization, a healthy community, and a healthy family. It does mean being part of, a subservient part of a man's frame, but choosing a man that is responsible and worthy of working in service to is of critical importance. And if anything, she should choose her female friends and family members that she gets advice from very carefully, and also seek the advice of respectable men and patriarchs of her family and community to guide her towards making healthy choices, not just for herself, but in choosing a mate. I think those are very healthy things to instill in young women. Would you agree with that?
I think the only thing I'll piggyback off of that is that I tend not to give too much advice to women just because they live such a radically different experience to men do. And I don't think it's the most productive thing. I think the only thing I'd say is that be very careful who you choose to get your advice from, because as a woman, literally everybody in the world lies to you all the time, especially men.
Especially men.
because we want to have sex with you. So
that's why I said respected patriarch.
Yeah. So I would point people in the direction of my friend Allie Drummond from Real Femme Sapien. I mean, we disagree on some things, but I point women to other females as opposed to getting their advice. I think you can get better advice from Mrs. Radlib than you will from Jordan Peterson if you're.
I was actually going to suggest her, Mrs. Radlib from Radical Liberation, Radlib's channel, Blonde in the Belly of the Beast for more, lowbrow fun entertainment, but also has some good messaging there. And I had a third one in my head. What's another good one? I can't believe I forgot it. She was who I thought of first, and now I've forgotten it. Maybe it'll come back to me. Sorry. Let's go ahead and move on to the next entropy here.
Well, if I might add something real quick.
Oh, please, go ahead.
In the name of Return with a V, they should read Plutarch's Moralia, the Life of Women.
Come on, be fair now. We all know that women can't read.
Because it's ancient history that is free from a lot of the biases that we have today. It's how we can see what life used to be like.
Fair enough. All right. moving on here, also from Heidi Van Buskirk, thank you again for $3. She says, is this debate about being able to have sex with someone who wants to have sex with you, or are we talking about a lifelong mate where I would assume sex would come with that? I don't know. Heidi, I don't know how much of the stream you caught. Only one of the 3 question segments was about sex. The debate was about the in the dissident spheres that we're in. This stream was about the conflicts between those who take a more pragmatic modern approach to what empowers men versus the tradcon Christian right, so to speak, that has conflict with a new approach because they believe it is ungodly or untraditional. That was the basis of this stream. It wasn't just about sex. Heidi Buskirk again. Thank you for your money tonight, Heidi. Thank you very much. Heidi for $5 says, and thank you, Yiz, for white well-being for our young white men and women who need to regain their identity and take on their own destiny, to be the men and women we were meant to be, to uplift themselves and their people. God bless. Well, thank you, Heidi. That's a sentiment that I share, and it's no secret that I love white people, and I seek the well-being and the healing of white people of all ethnicities. So, thank you very much, Heidi. Now, over on Cash App, we did have something come in from HG. HG says for $7. Thank you so much. Says, hey, good stuff. Well, thank you. I'm glad you enjoyed the stream. Thank you very much. All right. I'm going to give one last refresh to all of the places to see if we have any latecomers here. And I don't think we do. Nope. We're showing nothing over there or there. And nothing on hyperchats over on Odyssey. So now we have come to the end of the stream. And I would like to thank both of my wonderful guests for being here. Thank you, Todd. Thank you, Red Hawk. Thank you for Academic Agent for starting all of this and being one of the key pillars of the dissident spheres that many of us are a part of. And I would also like to thank all of you who helped share the stream, those of you who financially support regularly. And I would like to ask the 2 of you before we leave here tonight. Do you feel like that we have covered the topic that began on Cigar Stream 158? Do you think that we have covered it thoroughly now, or do you think there needs to be a part 2 to this? Todd, you go first.
Yeah, this is what I'll say. I think that the Cigar Stream was supposed to be a sort of preliminary to a longer discussion. So one, in the sense of dealing with the preliminary issues, I think we did that. But as to your second point, I do think this has opened discourse for a broader net. So if you want to have us on again, I'd be happy to come on. Or maybe somebody else would want to join this conversation as well. Because really what I hope to do was just open up a new avenue of investigation and move beyond the stalemate between the tradcons and the RP community.
Red Hawk, you?
I'm always interested to have these discussions, everything like this. I know I definitely frustrate people in the chat when I'm having these kinds of discussions because I try to keep the conversation as narrow as possible. I know it can be very annoying, but it's just part of my gig. You know, it's just I try very, very hard to stay on point and try not to speak out of my lane, so to speak. So I'd be happy to continue to discuss these ideas, but a lot of these things are just simply above my pay grade. So.
Understood. I'll remember that. And you guys that follow me for Discordant Dragons, you'll see Red Hawk on there again. And Praise of Folly. We've been friends for some time and known of each other. We just haven't streamed together because of whatever reason that might be. But he, of course, is invited to be on Discordant Dragons. And I do have a one-on-one stream with him in the works for later this year. So you'll definitely see him on my channel again. And I enjoy talking about this kind of thing because I think building community and being forward thinking about the why and the building blocks of whatever it is we build together is critical to think about and discuss. So in summary of the entire stream and the impetus for this stream, which again was Cigar Stream 158 over on Academic Agent's channel, was the conflict between tradcon religious right and a more modern approach of red pill helping men. From what I have learned from this conversation tonight is that there is a misunderstanding. It seems to be that those who have a problem with the red pill community, they are only looking at it through a lens of there are degenerate people here doing sexual degeneracy. What they are failing to realize is they're looking at a basic little toolbox that Red Hawk and the Manosphere guys want to give to every man to keep in his car, and they're angry that that toolbox isn't an entire machine shop. And I think that is what I've learned here is people who represent the manosphere community like Red Hawk, even if he is a moral, just man, he represents a very basic toolkit that he wants every man to have. And that's what him and the people in that sphere do. And so perhaps those that are on the religious or tradcon right that have a problem with that need to recognize morality and religious cultivation is something that comes after the mere basics, and that one side is merely trying to give the mere basics for survival and performing as a man, and then let them choose what they want to do afterwards, to choose whatever machine shop it is that they want to work in. Do you guys think that's a fair summary of the conflict?
Yeah.
Yeah, I would say so very much. I think
Okay.
just one little closing thing. I think people like Andrew Tate give my sphere a very bad rap. And people just immediately, go to it thinking that, oh, this is what the whole sphere is. When really, like 9 times out of 10, when a guy comes to this space, it's just because his girlfriend broke up with him and he doesn't know what to do and he doesn't know where he screwed up. The vast majority of people that come to the space have no intention of, being super duper degenerate, fuck like 2,000 women. Most guys simply just want to have one wife and a loving family. And we just teach guys, how to have their own frame. And part of that is, what do you want out of life? And most guys will choose the marriage path. So that's all I have to say.
Understood. We have one funny and short last minute entropy, which I will go ahead and read right now. It is from Heidi again. Thank you so much. You've been kind with your money tonight. For $3 more, she says, you need a man cave of your own, or perhaps a woman cave. Boys not allowed. Ha ha ha. Yeah.
No, doesn't she mean a eunuch cave?
Yes, a eunuch cave. No, I prefer to be. That's why I called this stream segment the Corner Club. I prefer to schmooze with successful intellectual men, and as my role of eunuch cast, to support them in making wise, healthy choices, and help them in guarding and keeping their women in line. So that's of course that second part is in jest. But thank you again for your money, Heidi. And this room is just an old room with all of my husband's stuff he collected when he was a kid up to being in college, and we don't really even use it anymore. It's more of a junk room now, but it is still cute and has some charm. So thank you very much. Well, with that being said, we've come to the end of the stream. I enjoyed this. I learned a lot about the conflict that could be between the different groups that were represented here tonight, and I hope that all of you learned something and will use what you've learned here tonight to build bridges instead of burning them. When there are people that are aware of things even a little bit, instead of chastising them or burning bridges because they aren't your particular type of dissident or your particular type of ethos, help them along their way. And like Red Hawk said earlier, point them to the ladder instead of chasing them away from it with something else. So with that said, we're going to close the stream tonight. Thank you again to Red Hawk. Thank you again to Praise of Folly. And we will see you all next Monday night for more Discordant Dragons. Good night and God bless.